The cherry blossoms were falling like tears outside the window of our family's traditional home in Shinagawa when I first realized that love could be stolen as easily as breathing. I was 24 then, naive in the way that only someone who has never truly been betrayed can. B.E. My name is Akira Yamamoto, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones sharpening the knife for your back. I had always believed that Yuki, my stepsister, loved me. We had grown up together since I was 12 and she was 10 when her mother Keiko married my father after my own mother's death. Yuki was beautiful in that delicate, porcelain way that made grown men stumble over their words large, doe-like eyes that could fill with tears at will, silky black hair that caught the light like spun silk, and a smile that seemed to promise innocence. I, on the other hand, was what people politely called striking, sharp features, intelligent eyes, and a presence that commanded respect rather than protection. Our father had built a successful architectural firm, Yamamoto and Associates, and I had spent years preparing to inherit it, alongside managing the family's traditional ryokan business that had been passed down through generations. Yuki showed no interest in business, preferring to dabble in art and poetry, drifting through life like a beautiful butterfly that everyone wanted to catch and protect. Everything began to unravel the night Hiroshi proposed to me. Hiroshi Tanaka was everything I thought I wanted in a partner: ambitious, handsome in a refined way, with plans to expand his family's trading company internationally. We had been dating for 2 years, and our relationship felt like a perfectly orchestrated dance. He understood my goals, supported my career aspiration, and our families approved of the match. When he took me to the rooftop garden of the Peninsula Hotel in Roppongi and got down on one knee with his grandmother's diamond ring, I felt like my life was finally clicking into place. Akira, he said, his voice steady and sure, you're the only woman I can imagine building a future with. Will you marry me? The ring was beautiful and elegant solitaire that caught the city lights below us. But now, looking back, I realized there was something missing in his eyes that night. Something I was too blinded by happiness to see. Yes, I whispered, and when he slipped the ring onto my finger, I thought I was the luckiest woman in Tokyo. We returned to the family home to share the news, finding Yuki curled up on the living room sofa in her favorite cream-colored sweater, looking like a lonely kitten. When I showed her the ring, her reaction was perfect. To perfect. Oh, Akira-ni, she breathed, taking my hand with both of hers, her eyes wide with what I thought was genuine joy. It's so beautiful. You're so lucky. Hiroshi-san is wonderful, isn't he? So kind and handsome and successful. She turned to Hiroshi with that radiant smile of hers. You chose the most amazing woman, Hiroshi-san. My sister is the strongest, smartest person I know. Hiroshi's response should have been immediate agreement, a warm smile, perhaps an arm around my waist. Instead, there was the briefest pause, so brief I almost convinced myself I imagined it before he smiled and said, I'm the lucky one. But his eyes lingered on Yuki's face a moment too long. The engagement period should have been the happiest time of my life. We set the date for late spring, when the cherry blossoms would be in full bloom. I threw myself into wedding planning with the same methodical precision I brought to everything, creating detailed spreadsheets and timelines, coordinating with vendors, and managing every detail. Yuk, I was the perfect maid of honor, always available to help with tastings and fittings, offering suggestions with that sweet, thoughtful way of hers. She seemed genuinely excited about the wedding, often staying up late with me as we addressed invitations or discussed flower arrangements. You're going to be such a beautiful bride, Akira-ni, she would say, and I believed her sincerity completely. But there were small things that began to nag at me, tiny inconsistencies that I pushed aside because questioning them felt like betraying the people I loved most. Like how Hiroshi always seemed to know when Yuki would be at our family dinners, even when I hadn't mentioned her plans. Or how Yuki had suddenly developed an interest in international trade and would ask Hiroshi detailed questions about his business ventures, her eyes bright with fascination. Your sister is quite intelligent, Hiroshi commented one evening after Yuki had excused herself early, claiming she had an art class the next morning. She asks very insightful questions about market expansion strategies. I smiled, proud. She's always been clever. I think she's just interested because she cares about us. Now I know she was gathering information, learning what made him tick, discovering what I couldn't give him that she could. The first real crack in my perfect world came 3 months before our wedding. I had been working late at the office, finalizing contracts for a major resort project, when I realized I had left some important documents at home. The house was dark when I arrived, which was strange because both Yuki and stepmother Keiko should have been home. I let myself in quietly, planning to grab the files and return to work. When I heard voices from the garden, through the sliding doors, I could see 2 figures sitting close together on the stone bench beneath the maple tree. Yuki and Hiroshi. They weren't doing anything obviously inappropriate. They were just talking. But there was an intimacy in their body language that made my chest tighten. Yuki was leaning toward him, her hand resting on his arm, and Hiroshi was looking at her with an expression I had never seen him wear. When looking at me, something tender and hungry and desperate all at once. I couldn't hear their words, but I watched Yuki tilt her head in that way she did when she was being particularly charming. And I saw Hiroshi reach up to tuck a strand of her hair behind her ear. My heart stopped. I stood frozen in the doorway, watching my fiancé touch my sister, with a gentleness that felt like a physical blow. When Yuki laughed that soft, musical sound that had always seemed so innocent, Hiroshi's whole face transformed with something that looked dangerously close to love. I should have confronted them. I should have stormed out there and demanded an explanation. Instead, I backed away quietly, grabbed my files, and drove back to the office in a daze. I told myself I was overreacting, that they were probably just talking about wedding plans or discussing some problem Yuki needed advice about. But the image of Hiroshi's fingers in her hair haunted me for weeks. I became hyper-aware of every interaction between them after that. The way Hiroshi's voice softened when he spoke to her. How Yuki would find excuses to visit the office when she knew he would be there for meetings. The glances they shared across the dinner table when they thought no one was looking. And yet, I said nothing. I was so desperate to believe in the life I had planned, so terrified of the alternative, that I convinced myself I was imagining things. After all, Yuki was my beloved sister, and Hiroshi was my devoted fiancé. They would never betray me. How beautifully naive I was. The truth finally shattered my world completely 1 month before our wedding. I had been at a cake tasting with the caterer when I received an urgent call from my assistant about a client emergency. I rushed back to the office, my mind focused entirely on damage control, when I heard voices coming from the conference room. We can't keep doing this, Yuki. The wedding is in for weeks. Hiroshi's voice, strained and conflicted. I know. Yuki's voice, softer but somehow more determined. But I can't watch you marry her when we both know you love me. My legs felt like water. I pressed myself against the wall, hidden from view, but close enough to hear every word that would destroy my life. It's not that simple, Hiroshi said, and I could hear him pacing. Akira, and I have been planning this for 2 years. Our families, the business connections, everything is already in place. I can't what? Yuki's voice was gentle but insistent. Can't choose love over convenience? Can't be honest about what you really want? There was a long silence, and then Hiroshi's voice, barely a whisper. You know I love you. You know I've loved you since the night we first really talked, when You told me about your dreams of traveling the world, of seeing art in every museum in Europe. She's wonderful, but she's so focused on business and responsibilities. She doesn't understand the part of me that wants to experience beauty, to be spontaneous. She doesn't see the way I do. Yuki agreed, and I could practically hear her moving closer to him. She sees a good match, a stable future. But I see the man who spent 3 hours with me at the art museum last month, who understands why Monet's water lilies can make someone cry. I remembered that day. I had been invited, but had declined because of a board meeting. I had encouraged Hiroshi to go with Yuki instead, thinking it would be nice for them to bond as future siblings. "What are we going to do?" Hiroshi asked, and his voice was full of anguish. "We're going to tell her the truth," Yuki said simply, "before the wedding. It's the kindest thing we can do, and if she never forgives us, then we'll live with that. But we can't live with this lie." I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, listening to the two people I trusted most in the world plan my devastation. They spoke about me with such clinical detachment, as if I were a problem to be solved rather than a person whose heart they were about to destroy. The worst part wasn't even their betrayal, it was realizing that everything I thought I knew about. My relationship with Hiroshi had been a lie. He had never loved me the way I loved him. I had been convenient, suitable, the logical choice. But Yuki was his passion, his inspiration, the woman who made him feel alive. I walked out of that building, in a trance, my whole world tilting on its axis. Everything I had believed about my life, my relationships, my future, all of it was built on quicksand. When I arrived home, I found stepmother Keiko arranging flowers in the kitchen, humming softly to herself. She looked up when I entered, her face brightening with that warm smile that had always made me feel welcomed in my own home. "Akira, dear, you're home early. How was the cake tasting?" I opened my mouth to tell her everything, to collapse into her arms and sob out my heartbreak, when something in her expression stopped me. There was a flicker of something, guilt, knowledge, that made me realize with sickening clarity that I might not be as alone in my ignorance as I thought. Fine, I managed. The vanilla with raspberry filling was lovely. Keiko nodded, but her smile seemed strained now. "That's nice, dear. Yuki's upstairs if you want to talk about it with her." Yuki, my sweet, innocent stepsister who was upstairs, probably preparing for her next secret meeting with my fiancé. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what to do. I could confront them, call off the wedding, expose their betrayal to both families. But the thought of the scandal, of having to explain to everyone why my perfect engagement had fallen apart, filled me with a shame that I now recognize was misplaced but felt overwhelming at the time. Or I could wait, see if they would actually go through with telling me the truth, or if they would let me walk down the aisle in ignorance. I chose to wait, and in doing so, I sealed my fate. They never told me dot as the days passed and the wedding approached. I watched them carefully, looking for signs that they were preparing to confess. Instead, I saw them growing more careful, more distant from each other in public. Their secret meetings became more discreet. They were better at hiding their glances. They had decided to let me marry Hiroshi while carrying on their affair in secret. The realization filled me with a rage so pure and cold that it frightened me. These people who claimed to love me were prepared to build their happiness on the foundation of my humiliation. They would let me pledge my life to a man who loved someone else. Let me waste years trying to win a heart that was already given away. But I still said nothing, because beneath the rage was something worse, a desperate, pathetic hope that maybe I was wrong. That maybe Hiroshi would realize what he was giving up and choose me after all. The morning of my wedding dawned clear and beautiful, with cherry blossoms drifting like snow outside my bedroom window. I sat at my vanity in my silk robe, watching the makeup artist work her magic, transforming me into the perfect bride. Yuki was there, Of course, radiant in her maid of honor dress as soft, pink that made her look like a blushing flower. She held my hands and told me how beautiful I looked, how lucky Hiroshi was, how happy she was for us. Her performance was flawless. "Are you nervous, Akira-ni?" she asked, her voice full of sisterly concern. I met her eyes in the mirror, searching for any sign of guilt or hesitation. There was nothing but apparent joy and affection. "A little," I said honestly. "That's natural," she said, squeezing my hands. "Every bride feels nervous. But you and Hiroshi are perfect for each other. This is going to be the most beautiful day." I almost broke then. Almost told her that I knew, that I had heard them, that I understood what was really happening. But something held me back, maybe pride, maybe curiosity about how far they would take this charade. The ceremony was at a beautiful temple in Kamakura, surrounded by gardens in full spring bloom. As I walked down the aisle on my father's arm, I could see Hiroshi waiting for me at the altar, handsome in his formal black suit. He was smiling, but when our eyes met, I saw something flicker across his face: regret, guilt, or just nervousness about the performance he was about to give. The vows were traditional, formal, beautiful. When Hiroshi promised to love and cherish me for the rest of his life, his voice was steady and clear. Only I could see the slight tremor in his hands as he slipped the wedding band onto my finger. I spoke my vows with perfect composure, promising to honor and support him, to be his faithful wife. The words felt like ashes in my mouth, but I delivered them flawlessly. When the priest pronounced us husband and wife, Hiroshi kissed me with what must have looked like passion to our guests. But I felt the reservation in it, the way he held back, and I knew he was thinking of someone else. The reception was everything I had planned: elegant, flawless, memorable. I smiled and laughed and accepted congratulations, playing the part of the radiant bride while my heart slowly turned to stone. I watched Hiroshi charm our guests, watched him dance with other women, watched him carefully avoid spending too much time with Yuki, while still managing to exchange meaningful glances with her. Across the room, during the father-daughter dance, my father held me close and whispered, "I'm so proud of you, Akira. You've chosen well. Hiroshi will take good care of you." I nodded and smiled, unable to tell him that his beloved daughter had just married a man who was in love with his stepdaughter. The real breaking point came during the bouquet toss. I stood at the front of the room, surrounded by all the unmarried women in our families and friend groups, including Yuki. As I prepared to throw the flowers, I caught sight of Hiroshi watching from the side of the room. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Yuki, and his expression was full of such longing, such desperate hope, that it took my breath away. I turned back to the eager faces in front of me, raised the bouquet high, and threw it directly to Yuki. I thought she caught it with a laugh of surprise, her cheeks flushing pink as everyone cheered. But when she looked at me, I saw the truth in her eyes for just a moment: not surprise, but satisfaction. She had been expecting this, hoping for it. That night, in our honeymoon suite at the Imperial Hotel, Hiroshi made love to me with careful technique and gentle consideration. He was attentive, thorough, everything a new bride could want. But I felt like he was somewhere else entirely, going through the motions of intimacy while his heart remained locked away. Afterward, as he slept beside me, I stared at the ring on my finger and finally accepted the full truth of my situation. I had married a man who loved my sister, and they were both content to let me live in ignorance while they continued their emotional affair. Behind my back, the honeymoon in Bali was a beautiful torture. Hiroshi was the perfect husband: in public, attentive, romantic, constantly taking photos of us together to post on social media. But in private, he was distant, distracted. He spent a lot of time on his phone. And while I never directly saw him texting Yuki, I knew. Hiroshi had planned a romantic dinner at the restaurant where we had our first date. And I had bought a beautiful watch as his gift, engraved with a message about our future together. We sat across from each other in the intimate, candlelit space, making conversation that felt increasingly strained. I'm grateful for this year we've had together. Hiroshi's when we returned to Tokyo. We moved into a beautiful apartment in Shibuya that Hiroshi had purchased as a wedding gift. It was modern, sophisticated, everything I should have wanted. But it felt like a beautiful prison. Our married life fell into a routine quickly. Hiroshi left early for work and returned late. I continued managing my responsibilities at my father's firm while trying to build a relationship with a husband who was physically present, but emotionally absent. The worst part was family dinners. Every Sunday, we would go to my father's house for traditional family meals. Yuki was always there, always perfectly sweet and sisterly, asking about our honeymoon, our new apartment, our plans for the future. She and Hiroshi were careful not to interact too much, but I could see the tension between them, the way they worked to avoid being alone together. After about 3 months of marriage, I began to suspect they had found ways to see each other privately. Hiroshi's work schedule became even more erratic, with sudden business trips and late-night meetings that seemed to multiply. Yuki started taking art classes and joining cultural clubs, activities that gave her plenty of reasons to be out of the house at unusual times. I could have hired a private investigator. I could have followed them, confronted them, demanded the truth. Instead, I did something that probably seems strange, but felt like the only way to maintain my sanity. I began building a life that didn't depend on them. I threw myself into work with renewed intensity, taking on bigger projects and expanding the family business. I started learning new skills, taking evening classes in international law and finance. I began cultivating friendships outside our family circle, people who didn't know about my marriage problems and could see me as more than just a betrayed wife. For almost a year, we maintained this careful dance of deception. Hiroshi and I played the role of happily married couple in public, while living like polite strangers in private. Yuki continued being the perfect sister-in-law, always ready with sympathy when I mentioned that Hiroshi seemed stressed from work, always suggesting that I needed to be more understanding of his business pressures. The facade finally cracked on our first wedding anniversary. Aid, raising his wine glass in a toast. You've been a wonderful wife, Akira. The pause before wonderful told me everything I needed to know about how hard he was working to find the right word. Have I asked quietly, and something in my tone made him look at me more carefully. Of course you have. Why would you ask that? I studied his face in the flickering candlelight. This man I had promised to love for the rest of my life. This stranger who shared my bed, but not his heart. Because I know you're in love with my sister. The words fell into the space between us like stones dropped into still water. Hiroshi went completely pale, his wine glass frozen halfway to his lips. Akira, what are you talking about? I heard. You? In the conference room at my office, a month before our wedding. I heard you tell her that you loved her. For a long moment, he just stared at me, and I watched the careful composure he had maintained for over a year slowly crumble. How long have you known? He asked finally, his voice barely audible. Since then. I've known since then. And you? You married me anyway. I nodded and saw something that might have been guilt, or shame, or possibly relief flicker across his features. Why, it was such a simple question. But I realized I didn't have a simple answer. Why had I gone through with a wedding to a man I knew loved someone else? Why had I spent a year pretending to be happy in a marriage built on lies? Because I loved you. I said finally, because I hoped that maybe if I was patient enough, understanding enough, perfect enough, you might eventually love me back. Hiroshi set down his wine glass and buried his face in his hands. Akira, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. I tried to stay away from her. I tried to focus on our marriage. But But you love her. Yes. The admission seemed to deflate him completely. I love her. I've loved her since the first time we really talked. And I hate myself for it. I hate what it's done to you, to us. We sat in silence for a long time, the romantic restaurant buzzing with happy couples around. U.S. while our marriage finally died its official death. What do we do now? I asked. I don't know. He said honestly, I don't want to hurt you any more than I already have. I almost laughed at the irony. He didn't want to hurt me, but he had built our entire relationship on a foundation of deception and betrayal. I said carefully, that we need to talk about ending this. The relief on his face was unmistakable, and it hurt more than any angry words could have. We agreed that night to begin divorce proceedings quietly, to handle everything as amicably as possible to minimize the scandal for both families. Hiroshi would move out of our apartment, and we would slowly begin the process of untangling our legally and financially connected lives. What I didn't tell him was that I had no intention of making things easy for him, and YUKI the next morning. I called my lawyer, not the family attorney who had handled our prenuptial agreement, but a sharp young woman named Rei Matsuda who specialized in complex divorce cases and had a reputation for protecting her clients' interests aggressively. I want to understand all of my options, I told her after explaining the basic situation. My husband has been having an emotional affair with my stepsister, and I want to ensure that when this marriage ends, I'm not the one who suffers financially or professionally. Ray was thorough and brilliant, and after reviewing our prenuptial agreement and financial records, she made several suggestions that began to form the skeleton of my revenge. Your husband's business has grown significantly since your marriage, she noted. Some of that growth came from contracts and connections facilitated through your family's firm. Legally, you may be entitled to more than the basic settlement outlined in your prenup. More interesting was what she discovered about Yuki's recent activities. Your stepsister has been taking art classes at a very expensive private academy. Ray reported after doing some background investigation I had requested. The tuition is being paid by a shell company that traces back to your husband's business accounts. So Hiroshi had been paying for Yuki's art education, probably telling her it was an investment in their future together when she was free to pursue her dreams without worrying about practical concerns like money. There are also several high-end purchases, jewelry, clothing, travel that appear to be gifts. If we can establish a pattern of your husband using marital assets to support his affair, it could significantly impact the divorce settlement. I felt a cold satisfaction settling in my chest. They thought they had been so careful, so discreet. But money leaves trails, and those trails were about to become very important. Over the next few weeks, as Hiroshi and I began the careful process of separating our lives, I watched him become lighter, happier. He was still guilty and apologetic around me, but there was an energy in him that hadn't been there throughout our marriage. He was a man counting down the days until he could be with the woman he really loved. YUKI, meanwhile, played her role perfectly. She was devastated by the news of our separation, constantly offering support and asking what she could do to help. She even suggested couples counseling, her eyes wide with concern. Maybe it's just a rough patch, she said during one of our heart-to-heart conversations. All marriages go through difficult times. Perhaps you and Hiroshi just need to reconnect. Her performance was so convincing that I almost admired her skill. Almost. The first phase of my plan activated 2 months after Hiroshi moved out. Ray had compiled a comprehensive financial analysis of his business dealings, including detailed records of his gifts to Yuki and evidence of their ongoing relationship. But rather than filing for divorce immediately, I did something unexpected. I asked Hiroshi to meet me for coffee to discuss reconciliation. He arrived at the small cafe in Harajuku, looking confused and wary, clearly hoping I wasn't about to make a desperate plea for him to come home. I've been thinking about what you said, I told him, stirring my coffee slowly. About how you tried to make our marriage work, but couldn't get past your feelings for Yuki. Akira, I'm not angry anymore. I continued, which was partially true. The sharp edge of my pain had transformed into something colder and more focused. I understand that love isn't something we can control. You can't help loving her any more than I could help loving you. Hiroshi's relief was palpable. I'm so glad you understand. I was terrified that you would hate me forever. I could never hate you. I said gently, you gave me a year of marriage. And even if it wasn't what I hoped it would be, I learned a lot about myself. I'm stronger now than I was when we met. This was entirely true, though not in the way he interpreted it. What I want to know, I continued, is what your plans are with Yuki. Do you intend to marry her once our divorce is final? Of course I'll always be on your side, she said quickly. You're my sister. Hiroshi is, well, he's a good man, but family comes first. I'm glad to hear that, I said, taking a sip of sake, because I may need your support in the coming months. This divorce is going to be complicated, and there may be some unpleasant revelations that come out during the proceedings. Hiroshi's face lit up with a happiness I had never seen. During our entire relationship, if she'll have me, yes. I want to give her everything: travel, art, experiences she's only dreamed about. I want to make up for all the time we lost. She's lucky, I said, and meant it in a way he wouldn't understand for several more weeks. We parted that day on surprisingly warm terms, with Hiroshi promising to make the divorce process as smooth as possible and me assuring him that I wanted him to be happy. That evening, I had dinner with Yuki at her favorite restaurant, a small place in Ginza that served traditional kaiseki cuisine. She was glowing with excitement, though she tried to hide it behind sisterly concern. How are you holding up, Akira-ni? She asked, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. This must be so difficult for you. It is, I admitted, but I'm starting to accept that some things just aren't meant to be. Hiroshi and I, we want different things from life. Sometimes people just aren't compatible. Yuki agreed, her voice full of gentle wisdom. It doesn't mean either of you is a bad person. That's very mature of you, I said. I've been worried about how this might affect our relationship. I know you and Hiroshi became friends during our engagement, and I don't want you to feel like you have to choose sides. Something flickered across Yuki's face: surprise, maybe, or concern. What kind of revelations? Oh, just financial things mostly. You know how messy it gets when you have to divide assets and determine what belongs to whom. There might be some questions about how Hiroshi spent money during our marriage, whether any of it could be considered misuse of marital funds. I watched Yuki's face carefully as I spoke, saw the moment when she realized that her art classes and gifts might become public knowledge. I'm sure it will all work out fairly, she said, but her voice was slightly strained now. I'm sure it will. I agreed. After all, the truth always comes out eventually, doesn't it? The next phase of my plan required patience and careful timing. I spent the following month quietly gathering additional evidence of Hiroshi and Yuki's relationship, not through private investigators or dramatic confrontations, but through simple observation and the kind of systematic record keeping that had made me successful in business. I noted when Hiroshi's car was parked near Yuki's art academy at times. That didn't match his claimed work schedule. I documented the jewelry Yuki wore that I had never seen before, the expensive handbags that appeared and disappeared from her collection. I tracked their social media activity, noting when they both happened to check in at the same locations at the same times, even though they were supposedly not seeing each other. Most importantly, I used my connections in Tokyo's business community to learn more about Hiroshi's company and his future plans. What I discovered was fascinating. Hiroshi had been negotiating a major merger with a European trading firm, a deal that would make him extremely wealthy and give him the international presence he had always dreamed of. The merger was scheduled to finalize 6 months. After our divorce became official, plenty of time for him to marry Yuki and bring her along as he expanded into European markets. It was a beautiful plan, and it would have worked perfectly if I had been the naive, heartbroken victim they expected me to be. 3 months after our separation, I invited both Hiroshi and Yuki to dinner at the family home. I told them I wanted to discuss the divorce terms in a civilized manner, to make sure we could all move forward without bitterness or scandal. They arrived separately, as they had been careful to do throughout our marriage, but I could see the tension between them, the careful way they avoided eye contact, the precisely maintained distance, the almost magnetic pull they fought against. Father and stepmother Keiko were also present, along with Hiroshi's parents, whom I had specifically invited. I wanted an audience for what was about to happen. I asked everyone here tonight because I wanted to share some news. I began, standing at the head of the long dining table where we had shared so many family meals over the years. As you all know, Hiroshi and I have been separated for several months, and we've decided to make our divorce official. There were murmurs of sadness and sympathy from both sets of parents, exactly as I had expected. However, before we finalize everything, I thought it was important that everyone understand the real reasons for our marriage ending. I believe in honesty, even when it's painful. I saw Hiroshi and Yuki exchange a quick, panicked glance. The truth is that Hiroshi has been in love with someone else throughout our entire marriage. Someone who has been very close to our family, someone we all trust and care about. The room went completely silent. I'm not saying this to hurt anyone or to create drama. I'm saying it because I think deception has caused enough damage already. And it's time for everyone to understand what's really been happening. Akira, Hiroshi said quietly, his voice full of warning. Please don't do this. Do what? I asked innocently. Tell the truth. Explain to our families why a marriage they all supported and celebrated is ending after just over a year. I turned to address the room directly. Hiroshi is in love with Yuki. They began their emotional affair before our wedding and have continued it throughout our marriage. I've known about it for over a year, and I've finally decided that I deserve better than to be married to a man whose heart belongs to someone else. The explosion of shocked voices was immediate and overwhelming. Both fathers began shouting questions. Keiko burst into tears, and Hiroshi's mother looked like she might faint. But I watched Yuki for just a moment before she composed herself and put on her mask of shocked innocence. I saw something raw and ugly flash across her beautiful face, fury of being exposed. Calculation as she figured out how to respond, and underneath it all, a cold satisfaction that our charade was finally over. Then she was on her feet, tears streaming down her cheeks, reaching for me with trembling hands. Akira, how can you say such a thing? How can you accuse me of something so terrible? I would never. Her voice broke convincingly. I would never betray you like that. You're my sister. It was a masterful performance, and under different circumstances, it might have worked. But I had prepared for this moment. I have bank records, I said calmly, pulling out the folder Ray had prepared. Documentation of Hiroshi paying for your art classes, your travel, your expensive gifts. I have photographs of you together taken by security cameras at various locations. I have witnessed statements from people who have seen you behaving intimately in public. The folder was thick and professional looking, its weight a tangible symbol of the truth I had spent months uncovering. I placed it on the dining table with deliberate calm, letting its presence speak louder than any words could. The room fell silent again, the air heavy with anticipation and dread. Hiroshi's face was ashen, his eyes fixed on the folder as if it were a bomb about to detonate. Yuki's tears stopped abruptly, her hands frozen mid-gesture, her carefully curated mask of innocence slipping for just a fraction of a second. It was enough for me to know I had hit my mark. What is this, Akira? My father asked, his voice low and strained, as if he were bracing himself for a truth he wasn't ready to face. Evidence? I said simply. Proof that Hiroshi and Yuki have been carrying on an emotional affair. Behind my back. Using marital funds to support their relationship. And planning a future together while I was left to play the fool. Keiko's sobs grew louder. Her hands covering her face as if she could block out the reality of her daughter's betrayal. Hiroshi's father, a stern man who had always prided himself on family honor, stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the polished wooden floor. Is this true? Hiroshi, he demanded, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Hiroshi opened his mouth, then closed it, his gaze darting between me, Yuki, and the damning folder on the table. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked utterly lost, stripped of the confidence that had always defined him. It's not what you think, he began, but his words lacked conviction, and I could see the realization dawning on him. That there was no way to talk his way out of this. Yuki, however, was quicker to recover. She straightened, her tears miraculously drying, and her voice took on a tone of wounded indignation. Akirani, how could you do this to me? To our family? These accusations are baseless, cruel. I've only ever wanted to support you, and Hiroshi, then open the folder. I interrupted, my voice steady but cold. If I'm wrong, if I've misunderstood, then let's look at the evidence together. Right now, in front of everyone. The challenge hung in the air. And I saw the moment Yuki realized she was trapped. If she refused, it would confirm her guilt. If she opened it, the truth would be undeniable. Her eyes flickered to Hiroshi, seeking rescue, but he was staring at the table, unable to meet anyone's gaze. My father, his face a mask of betrayal, reached for the folder. Let's see it, then, he said quietly, his tone heavy with the weight of a man who knew his world was about to change. As he opened the folder, the room seemed to hold its breath. The first page was a bank statement, meticulously highlighted, to show transfers from Hiroshi's business accounts to the shell company funding Yuki's art classes. Next were receipts for jewelry and designer clothing, all linked to purchases made during our marriage. There were screenshots of text messages carefully redacted to avoid anything too explicit, but suggestive enough to paint a clear picture. And finally, there were the photographs. Hiroshi and Yuki at a cafe in Kyoto, their heads bent close together. Yuki wearing a necklace I recognized as a gift Hiroshi had claimed was lost. During a business trip, the two of them leaving her art academy together, his hand resting on the small of her back. My father's hands trembled as he turned the pages, his face growing paler with each revelation. Keiko was crying silently now, her head bowed, unable to look at her daughter. Hiroshi's parents were rigid with shock, their expressions a mix of shame and fury. This can't be true, Keiko whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. She knew her daughter too well, had seen the signs I had ignored for so long. It is true, I said, my voice cutting through the silence, and I'm done pretending it isn't. I've spent a year protecting both of you, hoping you would have the decency to tell me the truth. But you didn't. You let me marry a man who loved someone else, and you let me build a life on lies. That ends tonight. Yuki's composure finally cracked. You're twisting everything, she cried, her voice rising with desperation. You've always been jealous of me, Akira. You've always wanted to control everything, to make sure I stayed in your shadow. This is just your way of punishing me for being happy. Her words stung, but they didn't surprise me. I had anticipated this, her attempt to turn the narrative, to paint herself as the victim. But I was prepared. Jealous? I repeated, my voice calm but sharp. I gave you everything, Yuki. A home, a family, my trust. I welcomed you as my sister, shared my life with you. And you repaid me by stealing the man I loved and lying to my face for years. If anyone's been living in someone else's shadow, it's me, trying to believe in a sister who never existed. The room was deathly quiet now, every pair of eyes on Yuki. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. For the first time, she had no performance, no tears, no charming smile to save her. Hiroshi finally spoke, his voice hoarse. Akira, I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. I thought I could make it work with you, that I could be the husband you deserved, but I couldn't stop loving her. His confession was raw, honest in a way that was almost cruel, but it was also liberating. For the first time, I felt the weight of my false marriage lift, replaced by a clarity that gave me strength. I believe you, I said, but your apology doesn't change what you've done or what I'm going to do next. The aftermath of that dinner was chaotic, but it set the stage for the next chapter of my revenge, a chapter that would test my resolve in ways I hadn't anticipated. The divorce proceedings began in earnest, guided by Rei Matsuda's sharp, legal mind. Using the evidence I had gathered, we argued that Hiroshi's misuse of marital funds to support Yuki constituted a breach of our prenuptial agreement, entitling me to a larger share of his assets than originally outlined. The negotiations were brutal, not because Hiroshi fought back. He was too guilt-ridden to put up much resistance, but because his family's lawyers tried to protect their business interests with every legal maneuver they could muster. In the end, I walked away with a significant portion of Hiroshi's company stock, a substantial financial settlement, and ownership of our Shibuya apartment. More importantly, I ensured that the details of Hiroshi and Yuki's affair were made public in Tokyo's tight-knit business community, tarnishing their reputations just enough to make their future plans more difficult. But the story doesn't end with the divorce. The perverted husband mentioned in the title came next, and it was here that Yuki's karma truly began to unfold. With my divorce finalized, I focused on rebuilding my life. I took over full control of Yamamoto and Associates, expanding the firm's reach with new projects in Singapore and Dubai. I traveled, reconnected with old friends, and began to rediscover the woman I had been before Hiroshi and Yuki shattered my world. I was 30 now, stronger and wiser, but still cautious about opening my heart again. It was during a business trip to Osaka that I met Kenji Sato, a charismatic real estate developer with a reputation for bold deals and an even bolder personality. He was older than me, 42, with salt and pepper hair and a laugh that filled a room. Kenji pursued me with a confidence that was both flattering and disarming, and after months of cautious dating, I agreed to marry him. What I didn't know at the time was that Kenji had a darker side. He was charming in public, but in private, he had peculiar and unsettling taste demands that made me uncomfortable, requests that bordered on manipulative. I won't go into details, as the memories are still raw, but it became clear within months of our marriage that Kenji saw me as a trophy, a means to an end for his business ambitions, rather than a partner. Worse, I discovered he had been unfaithful, using his wealth and influence to indulge in secret liaisons. I confronted him, and he didn't even bother denying it. This is how men like me operate. Akira, he said with a dismissive shrug. You're my wife, but don't expect me to change who I am. I could have stayed, could have endured another loveless marriage, for the sake of appearances. But I was no longer the naive woman who had married Hiroshi. I filed for divorce, this time with no hesitation, and walked away with my dignity intact. What does this have to do with Yuki? Everything. During my brief marriage to Kenji, Yuki had been working to rebuild her life after the scandal of her affair with Hiroshi became public. She and Hiroshi had married quickly after my divorce, hoping to salvage their reputations and start fresh. But their relationship, built on deceit, began to crumble almost immediately. Hiroshi's business suffered as key partners distanced themselves from the scandal, and the European merger he had been counting on fell through when investors cited concerns about leadership stability. Yuki, meanwhile, found herself ostracized in Tokyo's social circles. The art world, which she had hoped to conquer, was unforgiving to someone tainted by gossip and betrayal. Her once promising career as an artist stalled, and she became increasingly dependent on Hiroshi, who was struggling to keep his company afloat. It was during this time that Yuki, desperate for a way to stabilize her life, turned to Kenji Sato. I learned about their connection through a mutual acquaintance in the real estate world. Yuki, aware of my impending divorce from Kenji, had approached him, offering herself as a better match than I had been. She played on his ego, suggesting that she could be the glamorous, compliant partner he needed to elevate his status. Kenji, ever the opportunist, took her up on the offer. Their marriage was announced with much fanfare, but it was a hollow victory for Yuki. Kenji's manipulative tendencies, which I had escaped, became her prison. She had traded one form of betrayal for another, tying herself to a man who saw her as little more than a beautiful accessory to exploit. 2 years later, I stood in the garden of my family's ryokan, now fully under my management, watching the cherry blossoms fall. The business was thriving, and I had found peace in my independence, surrounded by friends and colleagues who valued me for who I was, not what I could offer them. I received a call from my father that evening, his voice heavy with resignation. Yuki came to see me. He said, "She's leaving Kenji. She says he's been unfaithful, controlling. She's broken, Akira." I felt a pang of sympathy, not for Yuki, but for the family we had once been. "What did you tell her?" I asked. "I told her she made her choices," he said quietly, "and that she needs to face the consequences." Yuki's marriage to Kenji ended in a messy, public divorce that left her with little to show for it. Kenji's wealth was tied up in complex trusts, and Yuki, without the legal acumen I had employed, walked away with almost nothing. Hiroshi, meanwhile, had declared bankruptcy, his company unable to recover from the fallout of the failed merger. The last I heard, he was working as a mid-level manager for a rival firm, a far cry from the international tycoon he had dreamed of becoming. As for me, I never remarried. Not because I don't believe in love, but because I've learned to love myself first. I travel the world, oversee a successful business, and mentor young women in Tokyo's business community, teaching them to value their worth and never settle for less than they deserve. Sometimes, late at night, I think about Yuki and Hiroshi, about the choices they made and the price they paid. I don't hate them anymore. Hate requires energy, and I've chosen to spend mine building a life that's mine alone. The cherry blossoms still fall like tears outside my window, but now they remind me of renewal, of the beauty that comes after loss. Karma doesn't always come with a thunderclap. It's quiet, patient, and inevitable. And in the end, it found Yuki and Hiroshi exactly where they stood,